So I'm very pleased to be talking to you tonight about the Buddha. I think I'm pleased. You know, there's always that thing of there's so much I want to say and want to communicate, and I hope I can do it justice. In fact, I can't do it justice. I can't actually do talking about the Buddha justice. Probably no human being can, least of all me, but I shall try my best. So what I thought I'd do, I was thinking about the shrine room, and I was thinking about this shrine, which has, of course, not just one but two images of the Buddha on the shrine. And I was thinking, like, what are we doing when we approach the shrine? What are we actually doing when we come and bow before the Buddha? And I thought I'd try and, describe at least what I think I'm doing when I do that to you. And I've got, it's in three sections, the talk, so I'm going to talk about like three ways to approach the Buddha. And they're kind of in ascending levels of approaching the Buddha, of trying to sort of understand, if one can ever understand, what we're doing when we're bowing before the Buddha. So I'm going to start with just a little personal experience. And I wanted to start with the first kind of vivid experience of death that I had in my life. I don't know if this was literally the first experience, but it's kind of, it came into my mind. It's often played on my mind. So I remember when I was a little girl, must have been about maybe 6 or 7, in the classroom in school, and the teacher came in and made an announcement to us, and the announcement was that one of our little classmates' mother had died. And I just remember in all of us children how shocked we were, and we were all, I think probably the same thought went through all of our minds, which is, your mother can die. Like somebody's mother's died, your mother can die. And then we must have all gone home that evening, then we came back in the next day, and all of us children were still really shocked. And we were in this little sort of huddle together, and we were saying, gosh, you know, how come, I can't remember exactly what we were saying, but the feeling was, how come everybody else, like the teachers, are just acting really normal? And I remember one of my little friends saying, I thought it would have been on the news, you know. And it's funny, isn't it, to think of that, but it was so true. Like she said, oh, I thought it would have been on the news last night. You know, just this, like somebody's mother's died, you know. Of course, you know, the adults were just, we're just getting on in a way, and I suppose we sort of forgot about it and just got on ourselves. So everything kind of went back to normal, and kind of that's probably still what we do as adults, don't we? Like death happens and we're shocked, but then we kind of go back to normal. So why I'm starting with this is because the Buddha was a human being. So very kind of axiomatic in Buddhism that the Buddha was a human being. He wasn't like a god or anything. Like, he was a human being. And at his first realization of death, he didn't go back to normal. He stayed with that experience of like people die, people grow old, people get sick, and people die. And with the knowledge of that, life can never be normal again. So the Buddha was a man. This is the first way we can look at the Buddha. As the Buddha was a man who paid attention to his experience, a person who paid attention to his experience. And so first of all, he paid attention to his experience of suffering. In particular, we're told in the scriptures of sickness, old age, and death. the traditional term for these is the first 3 sights. He paid attention to them. He didn't just go back to normal. He took them seriously. It's also very, very important to say that the Buddha was a person who also took seriously his experience of what was a glimpse of what seemed to go beyond the experience of suffering. This is called the 4th sight traditionally, and in the scriptures it's depicted as his first glimpse of a holy man, of somebody living a spiritual life. But what that means, what that symbolises, is a glimpse of something or somebody that hints at something beyond, even though you don't quite know what it is. The Buddha, when he saw this holy man after the experience of the realisation of sickness, old age and death, didn't quite know what or who he was seeing, but it was just a hunch, or maybe this holy man is offering a way to something beyond suffering. And not only was the Buddha a human being who paid attention to his experience, but the Buddha acted on his experience. This is really, really important because if you don't act on experience, however strong actually, it fades away. You don't think it's going to, but it does, I tell you, it really does. Easier to see in other people than ourselves, of course. I was thinking in this context of my sister, who was very, very ill a number of years ago and has since recovered. When she was ill, I stayed with her for a couple of years, more or less, and I was humbled by her insights. I remember when she was ill, she just seemed to just have a real insight into the interconnectedness of people, into, well, that suffering is part of life. She felt a lot of gratitude for her life and other people. And I remember this in particular, because I remember this feeling, I used to think, gosh, I'm supposed to be the Buddhist, but actually, I've been practicing all the years, but actually she's more in touch with what I've been trying to practice than I am. But because she hasn't got a practice. I mean, she's a very lovely person, my sister, but I think it's true to say, and I think even she would agree with this, that the vividness with which she experienced that time has since faded. Her life's fine, she's a nice person, a good person, but the vividness of that has faded. So if we don't act, if we don't have a way of acting on our experience, even when we're experiencing things quite strongly, either the truth of suffering or that there could be a glimpse of something beyond, it will fade. So the Buddha was a human being. First and foremost, the Buddha was a human being who paid attention to his experience and acted on it. And so the Buddha went on a quest. I should really be saying the Buddha to be, because he wasn't the Buddha yet at this point. The Buddha to be went on a quest. So this is the first way we can look at the Buddha, relate to the Buddha, as a human being who didn't just go back to normal, acted, sort of was driven. It was kind of like, he was driven by his experience. It was like a spiritual pressure, if that's not too grandiose way of saying it, that made him act, made him, we call it go forth. He went on a quest. So the Buddha's the exemplar, the perfect exemplar of the spiritual journey. So I'm not going to have time to tell you the whole journey in this talk. If you don't know the whole journey, in a sense you're kind of lucky in a way, because you've got it to hear, and it's a very beautiful story. But all I'm going to say is that the Buddha went on a quest and wasn't daunted on that quest. So the important things I want to pick out is the Buddha wasn't daunted by failure. So even when he went down on a wrong track and, kind of went wrong on the quest. He didn't stop, he didn't give up, he wasn't daunted by failure. And also, he wasn't daunted by, maybe daunted isn't quite the right word, he wasn't stopped by success. He didn't stop at lesser goals. I think that's quite important as well. He kept on at the quest. He didn't prematurely stop in his quest. And so there was this whole journey of twists and turns, some false starts, sometimes where he could have rested on his laurels but didn't. Eventually what happened, as often happens in these kind of mythical archetypal quests, is something came in sideways. So here he was on this path. Something came in sideways, and what that was it was a memory of a childhood experience. So he spontaneously remembered himself as a young boy sitting under a tree and just sitting, not even in meditation as such, because it wasn't as formal as that, but just sitting relaxed, in tune with the world around him, in tune with himself. He remembered that, and he thought, perhaps this is the way to the freedom that I seek. And he, as an adult then, he sat down under a tree again to meditate. That itself became another kind of part of the quest, because what happened when he sat down under that tree was he sort of unleashed all the forces, everything sort of within him, or everything within the universe that wanted to stop him reaching the fulfillment of his quest. We call that, in traditional terms, the attack of Mara. So Mara personifies all the forces, in the case of the Buddha, that were holding the Buddha back. Mara can visit us as well, and represents all the forces that hold us back. I particularly wanted to mention this attack of Mara, which the Buddha remained undaunted by, when all these forces, they're represented in Buddhist mythology as showers of arrows and rocks and boulders kind of being hurled at the Buddha and so on. And the Buddha sat undaunted when all that happened. I think I always like to mention it on retreat, because I always want to say to all of us, including myself, don't be surprised when Mara, if and when Mara attacks us. It's more like when than if. Every time we take a step forward in our spiritual lives, the forces, in psychological terms, you could say the work still to be done, the unintegrated forces within ourselves kind of come, and it can feel like they attack us. So, so don't be surprised if, having come on retreat, Mara sneaks up on us. And we can practice what the Buddha practiced. It's almost like the attitude the Buddha would have is, oh yeah, like, I see what's happening. I see you, Mara. I see you. I'm not going to fight back. I'm not going to be daunted by this. I see you. You've got this lovely gesture in the golden-coloured Buddha here, if you can see, of just like touching the earth in a gesture of confidence. So this is the Buddha's gesture of confidence, and it's like, I see what's happening. And then gradually, in the mythical story, all these boulders and arrows and everything just turn into flowers around the aura of the Buddha. So that's very, very, I've never done such a whistle-stop tour of the Buddha's journey to enlightenment, because there's so much more I want to say. But that's one way we can relate to the Buddha, as someone who's set out on a spiritual quest, and we can immediately learn from that. So we can learn about the importance of not distracting ourselves from suffering, not just going back to normal when suffering happens, but thinking actually trying to look deeper into it, whether that's sort of major things, but also, I think even more importantly, I think a kind of more important way to look at this is when, when it's just little things that aren't quite right. It was interesting on our team retreat, each of us told a little bit of our journey to Buddhism. And I was very, very struck by a couple of the stories. Like one person was saying that he'd worked very, very hard for all his exams, been at very prestigious university, and then passed his exams, got great grades, but then there was this feeling of, oh God, like, is this it? Is this it? So that's like a little niggle, and that's spiritually valuable. You see, the thing to do when you feel that little niggle isn't to distract yourself in all the many ways that we can distract ourselves, isn't to tell yourself to sort of snap out of it, but to go, that's like the grit in the oyster. If I can pay enough attention to that, that can lead me somewhere. Someone else was saying, all their life they'd wanted to meet the perfect partner. Not only met the perfect partner, but they had a private yacht, went on a cruise around all these exotic islands. And then there they were on this most beautiful exotic island. So it's like, oh gosh, I should be happy, but I kind of am, but it's still not quite it. Again, that's the little nugget. If you can pay attention to that and not distract yourself from that, that can lead you forward. So we can learn that from the story of the Buddha, but also those experiences of when we seem to come across something that can take us beyond, glimpses of beauty, really, either in a person or in nature or in art, when we just we have that moment of, it's like, pay attention to it. It's so easy to dismiss it, or so easy not even to notice it in the hustle and bustle of life, but we can learn, we can train ourselves almost to pay attention to that. And that's exactly what the Buddha did. And then act, pay attention, act, and then don't be surprised if obstacles come along on the way. That's part of it. That's part of it, because we want to grow and develop, and that's why we've come here. I can't imagine anybody's come here without wanting that. We want that with our conscious minds, but there's all these other forces within us that are like, you never asked me, you never asked me about this, and will try and pull us back. So we have to have that attitude of, okay, I see what's happening, and sort of be big enough for all that to happen within us. So that's the first way we can look at the Buddha as an exemplar of the spiritual journey. It's the Buddha of the path, So when we come and bow before the Buddha, we can say, I'm bowing before someone born a human being who had the courage to tread this path. But then, of course, the Buddha didn't just tread the path. The Buddha actually reached the goal. So the Buddha actually became what we call enlightened. I'll say a bit more about what that, how we can look at this word enlightenment in a minute. But the Buddha reached the goal. So the Buddha isn't just an exemplar of the path. The Buddha is an exemplar of the goal. And again, we can think of that. We can really relate this to our own experience. So here we are today. We've been practicing and learning the mindfulness of breathing meditation practice. We've been learning how to be mindful. Now, the Buddha is someone who's totally embodying that quality of mindfulness. So we can look at the Buddha as an absolute embodiment of the thing that we're learning to develop. And I think, just looking at the figures of the Buddha, particularly, say, this stone Buddha sitting there, you've really got that quality of stillness, of that strength, of that unity. If you met the Buddha, I imagine you'd see someone who's very, very, like, kind of one person. the Buddha wouldn't be somebody who's like, in one situation he's a bit like this, in another situation he's a bit like that. The Buddha would be one person. They'd be focused, they'd be directed. When I was thinking about this earlier today, I was remembering an experience of being on this retreat a number of years ago, and Sanghadasa was on the retreat doing the cooking, and we had to go out shopping to get some more food. And it was Christmas, of course, so the streets were very, very busy. And Sanghadasa, now he's not a huge man. He's quite kind of slight in build. There he is there, quite, not a giant. But actually, what I remember was he walked down the street like a giant. And I remember the crowds parted as Sanghadasa walked down. He did. Because he was so sort of focused that people just sort of naturally just stepped aside. And I thought, well, the Buddha would be even more like that. He'd be so mindful and focused that, he would just have a sort of natural authority. He wouldn't, of course, be like showing off in any way, but he'd just have that natural presence. You'd know when he walked in a room. So the Buddha's a complete embodiment of the quality of mindfulness, complete embodiment of love. The Buddhist word for love, for people who haven't learned it yet, is metta. We'll be talking more about that tomorrow. The complete embodiment of that. So you particularly see this in the life stories of the Buddha after his enlightenment. He went and taught. He was enlightened in his early 30s. He taught till he was 80 when he passed away. And the scriptures are full of stories of encounters of the Buddha with all these different people in all different circumstances and situations. So, you've got his encounters with like a mother who's lost her only child, who's mad with grief. You've got your stories of his encounters with like a serial killer who's like mad with bloodlust. Of his encounters with a mad elephant, of his encounters with all sorts of people, kings, proud kings, farmers, all sorts. And what you see again and again is the responsiveness of the Buddha. So in every single one of those encounters, the Buddha is pure love, but it's pure love in the appropriate form for each of those people. So it's completely responsive. He just knows how to act. But in the Buddha, it would be completely unself-conscious. So the Buddha's not thinking, I'm being so compassionate and so on. If we were looking at the Buddha, those people would have experienced the Buddha's love and experienced the Buddha's compassion and would have remembered it for their whole lives. But this is just second nature for a Buddha. For an enlightened being, this is just second nature. It's just how they are. So the Buddha is an embodiment, a total embodiment of love. I think I particularly see this when you see golden-coloured figures of the Buddha, something about the radiance of the gold, just the energy of that love and, the responsiveness of it. As well as mindfulness and metta or love, the Buddha is a complete embodiment of energy in pursuit of the good, of panoramic wisdom. The Buddhas, that's why we have figures on the shrine. You see, they're trying to sort of represent all these qualities, and of course we try and make them as beautiful and radiant as possible. You never can do it. Any sculpture or artistic impression it can't but fail to completely show the beauty of the Buddha, but you've got to keep trying to do it. You're trying to show these positive qualities. I was thinking about this recently, especially with, all the particularly extreme world events at the moment, that you're trying to show, particularly in depictions of the Buddha, that the qualities of love can be as strong as the emotions we usually associate with anger and hatred. We usually sort of rely on anger and hatred to get things moving, to get things done. But actually the radiance of the Buddha is trying to communicate that love can be equally as strong if only we could trust in it enough, if only we could develop it enough and trust in it enough. So we can see the Buddha as an exemplar of the path, also an exemplar of the goal. But of course he's not just an exemplar. The Buddha is an actual teacher. So in his actual lifetime, the Buddha taught for all these 50 years, nearly 50 years. And of course that teaching has been handed down. It's been completely handed down in an unbroken chain, which is amazing really, isn't it? Like we're here as a result of that unbroken chain from the Buddha to us. Even if we didn't really know anything about the Buddha before we came here, it's still true that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that completely unbroken chain from the Buddha to us. Sometimes when I'm sitting meditating, I just bring that to mind, and as soon as I bring it to mind, it's like my mind gets lit up. I just think, I'm in a world that's been lit by the Buddha. How fortunate. Like I'm in a world that's been illumined by the light of the Buddha. How fortunate I am. How fortunate I am that the Buddha taught, and how fortunate I am that other people through the ages carried on that unbroken chain. I particularly feel that here with my own teacher, Sangharakshita, living here, who set up a whole Buddhist movement in order to continue that unbroken lineage. He could have done something else. In fact, he was quite inclined to be a sort of mountain hermit and meditate. But his vision would have been, how can we keep this unbroken chain sort of unbroken for as long as possible? And the best way, of course, to do that is to create a body of people that can do it, to create a whole community, to create a movement. And that's what Sangharakshita has done in this community. And of course, there are many other Buddhist communities all throughout time and all around the world. So that's the second way we can look at the Buddha. So we can look at the Buddha as an exemplar. We can sort of bow before the Buddha as an exemplar, and we can bow before the Buddha as a teacher. And now I'm going to attempt to talk about the third way, which is the most important but the most difficult to talk about. And I feel like I spend my life trying to give talks to try and talk about this. Probably as much to articulate it to myself. So it's very, because it's impossible to talk about, actually. It's impossible to fully communicate, I should say. I can try and talk about it. Maybe I shall start. Well, go back to this image of this unbroken chain. So we're here because this chain has been thus far unbroken. But actually that chain will break. That chain will break. Even the teaching of the Buddha can't last forever. One day, actually, all it takes is for one link in the chain to be broken. It'll be broken. So one day that will break. We want to keep it unbroken for as long as possible, but one day that unbroken so far chain of the Buddha's teachings being handed down will break. But even though that will break, there's something over and above that will never break, and that's what I want to try and talk about. And this is the third way we can look at the Buddha. So my sort of working terms are the Buddha as transcendental force, or the Buddha as a principle of enlightenment. Principle of enlightenment didn't sound quite right, although it is kind of accurate. So then I thought transcendental force. That can never be lost. Even in the day, which I hope is a long distant future, when the teaching is lost, this transcendental force can never be lost. because it's not sort of losable, because it's truth itself, and that's why it's the most important, and that's what drives me to talk about it. So when we're relating to the Buddha in this way, yes, it's hard to talk about, because it's what we're trying to say is that although I've talked about the Buddha as mindful, loving, and so on, in this way we see that the Buddha is not just that the Buddha is a very, very mindful man. It's not just that the Buddha is a very, very kind man. It's not even just that the Buddha is a very, very wise man. It's something much more than that. So the unique insight of the Buddha, when the Buddha gained this, realised, maybe it's a better way to put it, what we call enlightenment, what he saw is that the way we habitually, or kind of commonsensically, divide the world into a me in here and a you out there is a delusion. It's kind of good as a sort of working concept, but in ultimate terms it's a delusion. And we get carried away with that delusion, that we unenlightened get carried away by that delusion. And we take it literally. Often the analogy is given a bit like a dream. You know how in dreams they can seem really real and all that, and it can even affect you when you wake up, but when you wake up you realise actually that wasn't true, and that kind of dreadful thing I did in my dream. I always have dreams I do the most dreadful things, so I always wake up with quite a sense of relief actually. That dreadful thing wasn't really true. Thank goodness I'm not going to be expelled from the order after all. I didn't actually do it. So that's a usual analogy. I had another analogy that I wanted to try on you. I hope this works. And just another little personal story. So I was, a few months ago at the Buddhist Centre, we had a first aid training day, very useful thing to have. A bunch of us that were here were on it. And I don't know if you've been on one of those, they're quite good actually, so you kind of learn what to do if someone faints or something like that. But what was quite good was the person leading it, he was getting us to do quite a lot of role play. And then at one point I had to act out the person who was having an epileptic fit. So I do want to say, I do apologise to anyone who does suffer from that condition in what I'm going to say, but what I'm going to say, in case what I'm going to say sounds a bit flippant, but what I want to say is I quite enjoyed, I must confess, acting the person having the epileptic fit. So I was lying on the floor having my pretend fit, and I was getting carried away. I was enjoying it so much I didn't want to stop, and it almost seemed to be kind of started to happen of its own accord. I was having this epileptic fit in pretense. But then, of course, Adam, who was leading the day, said, now, come on, stop playing now. And, I got back, I was all right. I wasn't having an epileptic fit, and I was up and I was in the day. So that was that. And then the next morning in my meditation, I was really annoyed with somebody. We'd been having a quarrel for quite a long time. And I was going over and over in my mind, she's just so annoying, and she did this, and people don't realise how mean she's been to me and stuff like that. And then suddenly I thought, it's just like the epileptic fit. I could just snap out of it, stop getting so carried away, just stop it. And I just thought, okay, I'll just stop it, and I can just be normal again, just like the epileptic fit. And what was astonishing was it was as simple as that, and also that it was, for a few days, I was absolutely blissful. Like my habitual kind of going round, she said this, and nobody knows how difficult it is for me, and how do you expect me to be, just completely disappeared, and it was really blissful. And I mean, it's quite a small example, and it's quite, after a few days, the experience faded, and I would say it was only on the psychological level, the experience anyway. But at the same time, it did show me something, just a sort of glimpse of what it's like to you can just like wake up from it. Here you are, you're just playing this game, and you can just wake up. So imagine, like, if you could do that on an existential level. So the Buddha saw that this game isn't even just a psychological thing, it's actually an existential thing. We're playing this game and we're getting carried away. We think it's real, we're so in it, we think it's real, and we can wake up from it. Often we talk about enlightenment as awakening. There's a difference or a metaphor. We can wake up from it. And what the insight of the Buddha was the driver of this whole thing is craving. So that's what's kind of keeping the game going. So whether it's me playing it, having an epileptic fit, or sort of playing it, being really kind of wound up, I'm sort of winding myself up. And the winding is craving. And you can stop it. The Buddha isn't even being moralistic about this. Often when we say craving, I think, craving, bad, we've got to give it. The Buddha's just saying that it's not moralistic. He's just sort of pointing out, well, that's what we come with, or even come because of, into this life. That's the driver, and it is possible to stop that driving force. You can stop winding yourself up. A bit like, when you used to wind watches up, you can actually stop winding it up. You can stop it. So the Buddha, that's what I mean when I say that the Buddha isn't just someone who's very, very mindful, or very, very kind, or even very, very wise. He is all those things. But the most important thing of all about the Buddha is the Buddha's unconditioned by craving. He's not persuaded by the delusion, so he's aligned with reality. So the craving's gone, and then delusion goes. They go at the same time. So I was talking about a bit like you stop winding the watch, and then the whole thing just stops. Or the traditional word nirvana, a word you probably heard, it literally means blown out. So craving's just blown out. But there's a problem with this. There's a problem with images like saying, we stop winding the watch, or we blow out the craving. Because you think, well, what's left then? So the problem is it can sound nihilistic to our mind, which is so conditioned by craving. Remember, I'm not talking moralistically. I'm just talking, that's just how we come. That's just how we're kind of hardwired. When we use words like nirvana, meaning blow out, it can sound like nothing. It can sound like nothing. So how are we to think about it? So how are we to think about it? I'm very fond of a little quotation that I found. Sometimes in your diary, if you've still got paper diaries, they've got just little quotes at the bottom. I found this in my diary, and for once it was really a good quotation. It was by a Scottish scientist, and he said, "The universe is not only queerer than we suppose, it's queerer than we can suppose." I really, really liked that. And I often kind of use it and sort of apply it to different things. So I thought, in terms of, when we talk about the Buddha having gone beyond craving, where has he gone? You could say something like, the Buddha hasn't just gone further than we think, he's gone further than we can think. Like, we, with our minds as they are, can't think, where the Buddha could have gone if he's gone beyond craving. It's like another image I sometimes have is like a bit of elastic, like that we're kind of tied to this sense of me by a bit of elastic. So sometimes we get a bit beyond it. So sometimes if we're very generous or very kind, we sort of forget ourselves for a little bit, and we stretch the elastic out quite far, but we always sort of buoying back to ourselves, yeah? So you could think, well, the Buddha has the elastic snapped, and he's flown into outer space. He's flown over the horizon of our experience. So the Buddha, he hasn't disappeared, he hasn't vanished, but he's gone over the horizon of our experience. So how can we relate to the Buddha? So in order to relate to him, in a sense, we have to bring him back. And so this is the third way we can relate to the Buddha, and particularly we can relate to bowing to the Buddha on the shrine. We think, well, the Buddha's gone over the horizon of our experience, but if we want to relate to the Buddha, we're going to have to bring him back. We're going to have to create an image that we can orientate ourselves towards, and so we create a shrine to do that. But it's more than that even. So we're creating an image that we can orientate ourselves towards, but we're also trying to open up, this is the difficult bit, open up to the fact that in a sense, as well as us moving towards the Buddha, that in a sense the Buddha is moving towards us. It's hard to talk about without it sounding a bit strange. So I'll try and again I can only try and use I can try a few different ways of talking about it. In 2 or 3 minutes. Let's see. Well, I think the best way to talk about it is to talk about our experience of beauty, which kind of leads quite neatly back to what Singaman was saying when we were thinking about the theme of this retreat and the title of it. So if we think about our experience of beauty, it can perhaps give us a sense of what I mean is not only are we moving towards the Buddha, but in a sense, the Buddha's moving towards us. Because I think with beauty, in our experience of beauty, we do sometimes, if we're lucky, kind of have that sense of something's coming to find us. I don't know if you've had that. The other night, it was the first night before this retreat, actually, I had a lovely dream. It's a recurring dream, actually. This was one of my nice dreams. I take it as an auspicious sign. I had this lovely dream where I was in a very, very beautiful landscape. It was a sparkling sea. Very, very simple dream, but very, very beautiful, that I was on a boat and the sea was sparkling. It was on the coast of Scotland. And there was just that feeling of, you've come back to me, this lovely image. Oh, you've come to find me, and it's because the retreat's about to start. So I don't know if you know what I mean by that. That sense, something's come to me. There's a feeling of rightness. Something's come to me. Sometimes that spontaneously happens, doesn't it? And what we can learn to do is consciously open up to this. We can consciously let that be a more active force in our lives. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking of a little video I saw recently. It was of, I don't know if you've been to the British Museum. In the British Museum, there's a beautiful, in the Buddhist section, there's a figure of Tara. Tara is a female Buddha. She's standing, she's very, very beautiful, and it's obviously the pride and joy of the British Museum. So this little video was about the statue, And you had the curator talking, you had a Buddhist scholar talking, and also you had a sculptor talking. And the curators were also obviously very, very proud of the statue, telling how the museum had acquired it and so on. The Buddhist scholar, very eminent scholar, was given a bit of the Buddhist background. All fine, I was thinking, oh yeah, I think he's got it right there, the Buddhist scholar. And then you had the artist, Anthony Gormley, sculptor, and he said, when you look at a statue like that, that's been worshipped over thousands of years, there's an aura around it. There's an aura around it that's created by the worship of all those people. And I just thought, oh, isn't it interesting that the scholar tells you the history, but the artist can see the aura. I don't know what he saw. I mean, I don't know if he literally meant he could see something shining, but he was connected with something. And I presume that his practice as an artist had, trained him, for want of a better word, to more consciously open up to that sense of something moving towards you. I think you get that. I think you get that sense also if you engage in trying to create art. Or actually anything creative. It doesn't have to be art, actually. It could be communication, for example. When you're engaged in a creative process, you sometimes get that sense of, I think if you're really engaged in it, you sort of know, I cannot do this. Do you ever have that, even with what does happen in communication? You think, oh God, I can't do this. Or when you're writing a poem, it's not me who's doing it. Occasionally you manage to kind of get out of the way, as it were, and the poem seems to write itself, or the right words seem to come out of your mouth, and you think, oh goodness, how did that quite happen? Do you know what I mean? There's something, and you look back and you think, God, how did I do that? So I think I want to talk about these because I'm hoping that most of us will have had some experience of that, of not just us moving towards something, but a sense of something coming towards us. I mean, the kind of classic thing in art is the talk of the muse, isn't it? That you kind of invoke the muse, and the poem writes itself. So I think this is the third way. I hope we'll explore this more on the retreat. But this is the third way we can relate to the Buddha. This is the third way we can relate to the Buddha on the shrine. When we bow before the Buddha, if we bow before the Buddha, we can say we're consciously opening up to something that I've called it a transcendental force. That's a very, very high way of looking at it, but just something, this sense of that something can be active in our lives that's more than us, that in a sense we experience as if it's coming to find us, and all we have to do is be open to that. So that is, I think that's all I'll say for now. These three ways so just to sum up, I'll say there's these three ways of relating to the Buddha. So, and all of them are valid, but each, I think they're successively higher ways. So we can relate to the Buddha as an exemplar, as someone who was born a human being, just like we are born as human beings. An exemplar of what a human being can do if we pay attention to our experience and if we act on our experience. We can bow before the Buddha as a teacher, as someone who has lit up the world by his teaching and has given us the gift of his teaching, and that's been passed down in an unbroken chain. And thirdly, and on the highest level, when we bow before the Buddha, we're inviting this transcendental force, this something that goes above and beyond everything, that can never be broken, that's truth itself, we're inviting that to descend, if I can use that word, and we're consciously opening up to that. The word consciously is important here, that we're doing it, we're consciously opening up to that and allowing it to become more active in our lives until it's so active in our lives that it is our lives, until it is our lives. So I hope that has me sharing who the Buddha is for me. I hope I hope that's opened up for you, who the Buddha, how to relate to the Buddha, how to relate to the shrine, what we're doing, what I'm doing when I'm bowing before the Buddha. So, thank you.